On the 26th of September 2022, the Nord Stream gas pipeline began experiencing pressure drops due to leaks. They had been caused by an explosion which showed the hallmarks of sabotage. The damage occurred in international waters, and we still don't know who was responsible. But we can look into the motives of the different players. The project was controversial long before it became operational in 2011. Russia wanted a route to pump its gas to Germany directly, creating an alternative to transit through Ukraine and making it possible to completely bypass the countries of Central Europe. Besides the environmental protests, there were voices in the European Union that Germany is putting their security at risk and that this could lead to increased Russian assertiveness or even war. Germany ignored these warnings. On the 14th of August 2024, the Wall Street Journal published a report claiming that Ukraine had destroyed Nord Stream, and the story was picked up by the German press. Despite the article being criticized, for many, Ukraine's motives are clear. After all, it has consistently targeted Russian oil and gas infrastructure since Russia's full-scale invasion. But is there another side to this story? What motive would Russia have in blowing up the pipeline?
Actually, the gas flow had been dropping for months before the explosion, and we need to be aware that there is a certain context to the whole story, to the story which is basically about the economic confrontation between the West and Russia. It was a tit for tat when it comes to the sanctions and when it comes to the gas flow, because gas flow to the European Union per se is not sanctioned. There were no sanctions imposed on the gas flow itself. However, Russians, even before their invasion on Ukraine in 2022, they started to reduce the supply of gas to the European Union, and it was especially visible in 2021 when the Yamal pipeline flow dropped significantly. That's how they started to drive up the prices of this commodity on the European market, laying some sort of a ground for the future crisis. Shortly before the invasion, when the Nord Stream 2 was freezed and the prospect of its launch became distant, Alexander Novak, so the vice deputy of the Russian Federation, said that there is a possibility that they will implement a countermeasure because of this, because of the Nord Stream being frozen, saying that they could stop the flow of the Nord Stream 1. In March 2022, Putin demanded from the customers of Gazprom to pay for the delivery in rubles, in Russian currency. Some companies agreed to it, but some did not. For instance, companies from Poland, companies from the Netherlands, companies from the Czech Republic and Bulgaria, among others, they rejected that offer, saying that it's a breach of the contract. Effectively, it led to the fact that Russians ceased to export gas to those customers because of the fact that they didn't agree to this gas for rubles scheme. Afterwards, in May 2022, Russians imposed sanctions on Polish and German entities, making it legally impossible to supply gas via Yamal pipeline going through Poland to Germany.
But how did this affect the gas flow through Nord Stream?
As we were approaching summer 2022, some things were happening with the flow on Nord Stream 1 as well. In June 2022, Russia cut the flow of natural gas via this pipeline more than half, allegedly claiming that it was due to the inability of repairing turbine, which was essential to make the gas flow, complaining that this problem arose because of the fact that the sanctions regime was implemented and Canada cannot send the turbines repaired back to Russia. Siemens, the producer of that part, said that it was not true. Nevertheless, the turbine after some days was sent back to Russia. But then again, in July 2022, Gazprom said that they would stop the flow due to the maintenance once again, saying that this is a force majeure, so the act of God, and they will not deliver the agreed amount of gas anymore because of necessary maintenance. Interestingly, at the end of August 2022, Gazprom halted all gas delivery through Nord Stream 1, officially again because of the maintenance. And it stayed this way up till explosion at the end of September. So, although technically there was a gas in the pipeline in order to pressurize, in order to make that pipeline operational, despite that, there was no delivery through this pipeline at the time of the explosion. Gazprom unilaterally cut the supplies, and there was a sequence when they were decreasing it bit by bit through 2022. After the Gazprom started to reduce the supply of gas unilaterally, we can see that its customers, the receivers of their gas, of the Russian gas, started to file lawsuits against Gazprom, seeking payments from them, trying to get money from them in a way of a fine for not delivering the agreed amount of gas. Czech companies filed those lawsuits, Dutch companies as well, if I'm not mistaken, German, Polish, there are plenty of them. In June 2024, Uniper informed that it won an arbitration against Gazprom, and Gazprom has to pay the German company 13 billion euros in fine because of the fact that Russians didn't deliver the agreed amount of gas. So we could see that if the pipeline Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2 would be operational, then if Gazprom would like to restart the flow of gas, presumably it would have to pay that fine. Gazprom was not interested in this proceeding whatsoever because it does not accept the verdict. So with this rhetoric and with this approach towards European courts and towards European customers, Russians try to shift the blame onto Europeans, the blame for the energy crisis and the blame for the prices spiked up. They are trying to assign this responsibility that the Europeans imposing the sanctions regime are the one who are responsible for all these hardships in European gas market, energy market, and in this, the hostility between Russia and the European Union. They were ready for that sacrifice, trying to blackmail Europe in order to stop the Western support for Ukraine.
But is it true that Russia had no alternative to the Nord Stream route?
The gas flow itself from Russia to the European Union, the pipeline gas, is not sanctioned. There were no sanctions imposed on that sector. It can flow through two roads that are still accessible for Russians. And I mean TurkStream, that goes to Turkey and then via Bulgaria to the European market, and also through Ukraine transit. And technically, it is still possible for Russians to increase the supply via those two roads, if they would be interested.
We can say that Russia benefited from Nord Stream being destroyed, but why would it want to destroy its own infrastructure?
Firstly, I would say that it was not only Russian infrastructure, right? I mean, Gazprom was the main investor in Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2, but let's not forget that there were other European companies also engaged in funding this project. So it's not necessarily and entirely true that it was Russian-owned infrastructure. Of course, it was important for them, but the division of the costs is more nuanced than it seems from the outlook. Also, I would point out that there is a precedent of Russia's gas pipelines being blown up. It happened in Turkmenistan and it happened also in Georgia. Of course, we do not know to what extent Russians were behind it, but nevertheless, studying the Gazprom's resolve towards its own customers, we could say that the blackmail, meaning the reduction of supply in winter periods, for instance, is a feature of their own policy towards its customers. Russians also say that they are willing to participate in the repairs of the destroyed pipelines, but at the same time, the estimations of the costs of it is lower than one would think. They estimate that at the level of $500 million. So it's not a high cost comparable to the fine awarded to Uniper, for instance. So they are declaring the goodwill, but we cannot say, for instance, by looking at the flow from via Ukraine or via TurkStream, we are not seeing a significant signs of their goodwill in terms of supplying more gas to the Europe. Moreover, let's not forget that the gas sector, gas supply, the gas exports for Russians were not only about money. Actually, when we are looking at the financial structure of the oil and gas sector, of the oil and gas revenues to the Russian budget, up to 2022, oil share in these revenues was amounted to 2/3. Hence, we can see that Russian gas deliveries is more of a political meaning to the Kremlin. It serves more as a political tool, as a leverage, rather than a cash cow.
But motive does not mean guilt, either in Ukraine's or Russia's case. How much do we know about the incident?
There are certain things that are omitted when it comes to the debate on this explosion and this act of sabotage. For instance, it was not the explosion that caused the gas prices spike. It was the reduction that happened before. Actually, when we are seeing how the price was formed throughout 2022, we could see a drop in the gas price after the explosion. So the claims that the act of sabotage fueled the energy crisis, they are not true. Also, Danish newspapers published an investigation that was done after the sabotage, proving that there was an increased naval activity in the area of where the explosion took place, shortly before the explosion happened. These investigations reveal that Russian naval ships were active between June and September in this area, conducting unknown activities. Those ships, as reported by those investigations, were also intentionally turning off their transponders in order to presumably conceal what they have been doing there. So I think that this particular fact of that activity being conducted before the explosion should be taken into account when one wants to speculate about who has done what in that area.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this content, check out our other videos and please subscribe to our channel.